Welcome to the AACC Podcast. My name is Ray Chang, and I serve as the president of the Asian American Christian Collaborative. I am so thrilled to invite you to this conversation on the quote-unquote Asian American Church, Asian American Christianity, and Asian American theology with none other than Professor, Dr., Mr. Senor Daniel D. Lee. Welcome, Daniel. It's great to have this conversation.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, no, I'm so thrilled because I mean, I've shared this with you before, but you are among a small handful of people that are actively thinking about the integration and even the commingling of Asian American theology as well as Asian American identity and studies. There's not that many of you.
Yeah, I call myself we're one of the very few professional Asian American Christians, right? I mean, think about that. That's a weird idea. And there's a weird burden to that, like trying to be professionally wear this identity as part of what you do. There are a lot of Asian American scholars that are out there, and they might do New Testament or theology, but to have the burden of being the Asian American as part of your vocation and title, it's a weird idea.
Yeah, that's a heavy load to bear.
It feels that way sometimes. It feels quite burdensome, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so tell me, what are your thoughts on the state of Asian American Christianity today? Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses? What are some areas that we really need to lean into?
Overall, because of anti-Asian hate and COVID and everything else, there's a lot more awareness overall, right? So that people are really interested in it, and people are reading up on it on TikTok and whatnot, right? I think part of the problem of how to make sense of Asian American identity is that we still have a huge problem in terms of having adequate language to articulate what it means to be Asian American. And the problem is, it's not individually just our fault. Like, our whole education is white normative. I mean, why would it not be, right? But when you think about learning about ourselves in a way that we actually know our history more than my own family experience, it's very difficult to do. And you have to go get it. It's not something you'll just get. Like, my kids know. Like, I always talk about the fact that my kids grew up in Temple City High School, Temple City School District, predominantly Asian American. It's the 626, SGV, the most Asian American area in the US. But when you look at the curriculum, it's still pretty much white. You don't get a lot of Asian American history, right? So think about how weird that is. The fact that even at that place where it's majority Asian American students, a lot of Asian American even teachers, the curriculum-wise doesn't have a lot of Asian American stuff in it.
So, you're talking about a knowledge of our history, a knowledge of the ways our communities have interacted before. What are we missing? Language?
I think of it this way. If you use all the language you have absorbed from everybody else, you will use that to talk about yourself. If it's very racist, if it's very limiting, you will talk that way because what other language would you know? Except that language is a language that others us, that's not centered upon our experience. You're basically using language that doesn't center our experience to describe our experience. And that it's almost like of course, this idea of internalized racism is that, right? So even when you're trying to assert yourself, trying to talk about your Asian American experience, we still do it othering ourselves. That's such a weird way of talking about it. But let me give you an example. Recently, I wrote an article about shame, Asian shame. And the article was the fact that people use Asian shame way too much. Mm-hmm. Because white people love to tell us the fact that, you're weird. The reason why you have psychological problems is because you have Asian shame. And so that sounds good, right? Hey, you have a problem, you fix it. Except because we don't have a lot of language that deals with impact of all the internalized racism, how microaggressions, we don't commonly have that. So therefore, even if we are shamed through a racial experience, we will call that Asian shame. I'll tell you the parable that we talked about, right? So the typical parable of a black kind of a racial experience is the fact that you get pulled over, cop pulls you over, and then you flinch, cop shoots you, you die. It's like a parable of how racial experience looks like for Black people. Think about Asian Americans, how they experience racism. You might go to a school in Arcadia, like you study really hard, right? You might be in Orange County, go to Whitney, like one of these prestigious high schools. You study really hard. Maybe you go to Ivy League, study really hard. And then you go to grad school, study really hard. And then you get so stressed. So you commit suicide. And then everybody says, oh my gosh, our community is so messed up. Our community is so fraught with shame, culture, whatever, right? Toxicity of our culture. And that's what I would say, what I would call a parable of racial experience in Asian America.
I mean, flesh that out. What do you mean by that? Like,
Well,
so
think
if
about
someone's
this.
listening in, like, how is that a parable of racial experience?
Well, because it's so indirect. And people don't think that, there's hopefully a bit more now than before, right?
Yeah.
But generally, people don't think about Asian Americans having a racial experience. Before COVID, nobody even thought that we actually experienced any racism.
Well, some of us.
But,
a lot of Christians.
Yeah,
that's for
a lot
sure.
of Christians, right? A lot of people didn't have that language, right?
Yeah.
So I remember teaching a class, and they're like, oh, like this, one of the classes I teach, like Asian American Identity Ministry, and one of the students said, hey, I've never experienced racism growing up my whole life.
Yes.
People call me like all this, all these words, but that's not racism.
Yes.
Like the C word. And then and then the whole class is like, holy cow, like what is he talking about? Because in his mind, that's not racism.
Yeah.
He's not black, he's not racism,
yes.
right? So what I'm saying is we don't realize the fact that we don't have language for it. So that person who's studying really hard, they don't realize the fact that all this racial pressures, along with cultural pressures, obviously, but racial pressures make performance even more stressful. It adds on top of it, right? And people think, oh yeah, why don't they just get support? I'm like, you think psychological support is really going to be that beneficial? I don't think people realize this. The fact is sometimes even the Asian American psychologists are trained by white psychology. So in that sense, they might not really help you. They might say, being who you are is a problem. Your culture is a problem. Who you are is your family is a problem. Now, you and I know it's not like we're perfect, but should the whole thing be considered a problem? It's a weird way of thinking about it. So you keep on absorbing all this toxicity in the culture. It's really racism, but we have no language for it. And then finally, it kind of breaks you. But because our community has no language or race, the only thing we can blame is the Asian heritage, which, once again, it's not perfect. We have problems with Asian heritage.
Yes.
But the question is, should that be the culprit for everything?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So you offer a really helpful framework in your teaching, right? That kind of helps address some of this. Your quadrilateral.
Right.
Can you share a little bit about that and how you think that would help Asian American Christians and those who are friends of our community, like really understand what is influencing and impacting us? Because I think you're totally right. I think that the majority of Asian Americans don't know how to recognize the racism that they experience, mostly because it's either downplayed by other people or minimized by those that they're closest with. And then so everything becomes like, oh yeah, that was just a bad apple or one random experience that gets piled on top of every other random experience and then not actually articulated as racism. So give us a sense of like what would be helpful.
Yeah, so I think over a decade ago, like this is actually like, because I've been working on this thing for 2 decades. And, one of the professors that I was studying with one time said, hey, there's actually no particular uniqueness to the Asian American experience. And I said, that's crazy. No, we have something particular, right? He's like, well, if it's migration, like, Hispanics have migrated over. If it's racism, there's Asian, like Black Americans who, like, what particularly is an Asian American experience? And I was like, this is crazy. If you can't name it, you can't do anything with it. You can't engage it theologically. You can't engage it spiritually. It's not a thing. And this is because it's so complicated. I think that's why a lot of Asian Americans have a really difficult time trying to make sense of who they are, right? Because if you don't have sophisticated language, then you're going to use very crude language. Crude language is saying stuff like what I used to say, like, I grew up saying stuff like, oh, that pastor is so Korean, which means very bad. Everybody knows my friends. Like, they know that means like they're, I don't know, oppressive, authoritarian, sexist, or whatever, right? Oh, that pastor's so Americanized, which is good, right? Now, the weird thing is, that's a very clumsy instrument. Like, Korean covers so much. Like, I'm Korean, you're Korean, right? There are a lot of Korean Americans who are Korean ethnically as well, right? If you use that word negatively, like some of that will get on me too. Like that toxic, like, my critique will get on me as well. So that basically means I'm basically saying all of Koreanness is bad. So I said that we need something a lot more sophisticated, more precise, because what I don't want to do is do cultural surgery with the sledgehammer.
Yes.
Right? I mean, think about that, right?
And that's what we currently do all the time.
And because think about surgeons learn how to use all the specific tools. They don't actually get like a kitchen knife and do surgery on somebody. They're going to be crazy.
Yes.
So to do that, you literally have to learn. And this is basically why we say you need critical knowledge, not just what you grew up with, not just personal experience. That critical knowledge is something you have to learn. You have to like literally go to school for it or read books in a very methodical way, right? So with that in mind, I think the tool that I developed was, let's talk about Asian American identity, because Asian America is a big place, right? As the intersection of 4 themes, right? We call it Asian heritage, because we're Asian American, we're not Asian. So we have this heritage that comes from Asia. So we have Asian heritage, whatever that may be. We have the migration experience. Maybe you came as a refugee, or maybe you came as an adoptee, right? You came as an immigrant, like your whole family came, but you came somehow. That migration experience impacted you somehow. And then you have the broader American experience, because we are American. Like, all the culture, we love baseball, football, all this different stuff, right? It's part of what we do, right? My kids love Taylor Swift. It's all part of who they are. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Quintessential Americana, Taylor Swift.
And they don't have to be like, I shouldn't like this because I'm Asian American, right? So there's along with getting all the white evangelicalism that we're part of, all that stuff that we grew up with, John Piper, Tim Keller, or whatever, right? Along with the racial experience, somehow we are not just immigrants, because if we were French immigrants, even if first, second generation, you wouldn't experience anything after a while. But because we are racial minorities, we have some kind of a racial experience, right? Racialization. So we say Asian heritage, migration, American culture, and racialization. And we all experience it. I think my point is, I don't really care what you call yourself. You're going to have to deal with these things. So the more sophisticated your language is to deal with these aspects, the better it's going to be.
No, and this is great because I love the framework that you provide. I remember when I first encountered it, I was like, this is a very good, very comprehensive framework. I'm like, and I think that if you can actually understand and put this on as a lens through which you interpret and make sense of all of your experiences as an Asian American, and more specifically as an Asian American Christian, like you would be served so well and you would serve others so well. One question I did have is, as you are wrestling with this, do you feel like you missed anything? Because I try to poke holes and I really struggle with that. And I'm wondering, like, are there any things that you feel like are missing, especially from the vantage point of our faith?
The reason why I frame it this way is because all 4 have deep roots of theological engagement. Right? Asian heritage, if you're talking about like Hinduism or Confucianism, there's a long history of Christianity interacting with that, right? Or migration, the whole theology of migration. Or American culture, missional theology, there's so much of that. Racialization, obviously, theology and race. So that's basically why when you structure it this way, it's easier to do research, right? I think generally my whole thing is to be able to name things precisely, right? If you can name it, like, I would say, like, isn't that weird, the fact that Jesus asks, like, what's the name of the demon? Who cares, right? Jesus is like, oh, what's your name? Like, why does names matter? Because in the Bible, biblically speaking, theologically, spiritually speaking, names matter a lot. Names give you authority and power over something, right? So if you can name a particular experience and do it well and precise, then you can actually do something with it. You engage it with the gospel, pray over it, or whatever. But if you misname something, like it's really internalized racism, and you call it Asian shame. Asian shame is our problem. It's like we have to do something with it because our cultural heritage is bad. Racism is something that's been done to you.
Yes.
So if you blame yourself
Yes.
for something that somebody else is doing, that's a really, really problematic dynamic.
Yes.
That's why I say you have to be careful with something like using your heritage for everything, because using heritage is what like a lot of conservative Christians do, and it actually feels safe. A lot of like a lot of people who don't want to deal with race, they say, "Oh, deal with culture. Like you're just your heritage. Deal with that," and that covers a certain degree, but it doesn't cover all the racial dimensions of it. But let me answer your question. The thing about what I'm doing this now with like, Filipino Americans and like, South Asian, Indian Americans. And I realize, those frameworks, the framework still works to a degree, but it's complicated. Like where does Spanish colonization go? Like it's so formative for Filipino Americans, right? Where would it go? Like, is it heritage? You could call it heritage because they brought it over with them, right? It's definitely not American culture because there's American colonization, so you can actually talk about that. But where does Spanish colonization go? Or like for like the Indian, where does British colonization go? Like that's weird. Like where does it go? I think a lot of times I'll say, well, like it's such a significant thing, but we don't really know how to categorize it. So that's basically why I've been working with different different leaders and saying, what do you do? What does it look like in the context? Yeah. Right. I think the basic structure kind of works because our brains still think this way. Like, this is actually what my parents brought over.
Yes.
So I think it still works that way. Because I mean, like, it's not like Indian Americans are colonized by British now. Yeah. It's something they brought over from India. So I think it works that way. But it is kind of weird, like, to think of it, like, in terms of the quadrilateral. Yeah. I think it still works, but it's you have to kind of tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, because one of the kind of the experiences I've been trying to figure out and kind of discern through your quadrilateral is like the Chinese person that primarily experienced Christianity in a Korean context, or the Filipino that primarily experienced Christianity in a Korean context or Korean American context, and through the immigrant church, or even a second generation Asian American, Korean American church. Yeah. Like, I'm not quite sure where to put those. And there's quite a lot because Koreans are such a large percentage of at least the evangelical Christian population at like almost 30%. Yeah. And so I don't know if you have an answer to that or if you've thought through that. Yeah. What your kind of response is for people that are in that experience group.
Yeah. So when I teach it, I say, look, you might have like, I know people who are multi-ethnic Asian American. Like, fathers like Japanese American and mothers Korean. Like so you say, there might be multiple things, or if you're, because then you end up having different family dynamics, right? So you have to kind of acknowledge both. One of the biggest things that I think we press at the Asian American Center, and we realize this because in the very beginning, we used to talk about, be true to yourself, own who you are, your authentic self, and this all sounds good. But we always say, look, use that for a decade and you realize it doesn't work that well. Why? You look at somebody who is adoptee and say, well, be authentically who you, what does that mean?
Yes.
Do I go back to China? Like, is that, well, I went to China and I didn't feel like I was at home. What do you do with that, right? Yeah. I realized that has its own problems. And does that mean, like, this is a joke that I would say, like, if I'm being my authentic true self, do I eat kimchi every day? Like,
you should. You better. You're Korean.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, what does that mean? What if as a Korean I don't like kimchi? Like,
my goodness.
Like my daughter, the third
that's
one.
That's an offline conversation we gotta have.
Yeah, like, my daughter Teresa, my wife was like, hey, you gotta eat kimchi because it makes you Korean or whatever. Yeah. She's joking and she's like, I don't like kimchi. Does that make me not Korean? She's like, she was serious, right? I think what I'm trying to say is that even within your heritage, it's part of who you are, but how you negotiate that's very different. So what we say is that we want all of you to be in Christ. We want God's shalom to all of who you are, which is very different than saying be authentically who you are, right? We just want all these things to be reconciled to Christ. Yeah. And then you're on a journey. Yeah. Maybe when you're in your 20s, you didn't like all this, like Taiwanese heritage stuff. And now you're comfortable with it. Yeah. In your 40s. It's a journey and you're trying to be at peace with it, which means you might not like it. There are people in Taiwan who don't like certain things, right? Who are very Taiwanese. Yeah. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to feel like you have to be something you're not. It's just the fact that you have to understand the fact that do I not like it because I've internalized racism and I have so much racial trauma? Or do I not like it because I just don't like it? Yeah. And that's perfectly fine. Yes. You don't have to like it. I think Asian American identity can become like its own idol and its own like straitjacket. What we're trying to do is not like trying to make people uber Asian American. Like I don't think God cares. There's no command in the Bible that says thou shalt be more Asian American. I mean, I think people think that way, right? Some of our immigrant churches kind of force this idea.
Yes.
But biblically speaking, there's nothing that says that.
Yeah. What's
important for us is to own it, to be able to kind of offer it up to God, so that we can bring all of who we are into God's presence.
Yes.
Not necessarily try to be more, make sure that you speak the language. And like I always tell people, like, I'm not your grandmother, I'm not your mother, I'm not trying to make you more, make you more Filipino than you really are.
Yeah.
Because I think people think that way. It's like a lot of guilt connected to that, I think.
Yeah. That's so good. And the language that we generally been using is around like, be all that God has intended you to be, because who you truly are is a very fluid concept, which, is kind of squishy.
Yeah. Hey, AACC listeners, we're excited to invite you to the AACC Conference, our very first in-person conference dedicated to uniting Asian American Christians, pastors, ministry leaders, professionals, and emerging generations. This conference will take place on October 27th through 29th at Open Door Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. Join other Asian American Christians as we reclaim our shared history, embrace our cultural identity, and lead from a place of spiritual depth. Secure your spot, check out our wonderful lineup of featured guests, find the schedule details and more on our website. We hope to see you there, and thanks for tuning in.
That kind of makes me ask the question, like, then what is Asian American Christianity? Should we be actively pursuing the preservation of it, and why?
I don't think, somebody asked me this. They said, well, how do you preserve your heritage? And I'm like, I don't know if we are called to preserve it. We are called to make sure that we need to preserve it, not in the sense of like trying to preserve something. We have to preserve it so that we have language for it. There's something really weird. Like I love, it's kind of random. I love
Taylor Swift.
No. I love Icelandic sagas.
I don't even know what those are.
Yeah. In Iceland, they have all this like pagan stories, family stories, right? It's like Vikings and stuff like that.
Oh,
it's so random, right?
Yeah, those are great.
Who
doesn't love a good Viking story?
What's interesting is the fact that these Icelandic sagas were pagan, but they were preserved after Iceland became all Christian. Because they want to lose it all. And I realized you can't lose that. You need that to still make sense of who you are. You're not trying to be pagan, but you need to know what that is. So you have to preserve it for that sense. Like I tell people, like I studied like Confucianism for over a decade. For example, because Confucianism is so complicated. It is not something you can actually easily critique, right? It's like over 2,000 years old. Like it's not that easy, right? Like, I read an article, Confucianism is all bad. I'm like, yeah, it's like I read an article on Christianity. All of Christianity is bad. It's ridiculous, right? So I'm not trying to be more Confucian, but in order to understand myself, I had to learn it. And I think in that sense, it's really important fact that we actually learn these things and understand what that is, right? I don't think going forward, like, am I going to keep this forever? But I'm like, it's not so much of am I going to act Confucian, but I understand who I am. And in that sense, it's important the fact that we understand these artifacts, we understand these cultural elements. If we lose it altogether, then we will be experiencing something without having language for it. We're like, what is that thing called? Then we're back to Koreanness. Like, that's not helpful. Then we're going to, once again, end up doing surgery with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, keep going.
Yeah, so I think that's a big part of, I think, how we have to seriously own ourselves, right? And that part of it is important, I think. But where we kind of go, where do we end up, even as an Asian American Christianity, Asian American, I think it's kind of fluid, right?
I mean, so like let's use the Icelandic
sagas.
Icelandic sagas as an example. Like, what do they lose when the culture has moved on, when it's transformed around them and beneath their feet? And what do they gain through the preservation of those sagas?
Let me take it a different direction, because we generally tell people that we learn all the Asian American identities things so that we can three things. We can actually talk about the particular hurts, right, that we have, because they're particular, like the pains that people have are very particular, very specific. So we can talk about those things if we can bring healing to that. The particular sins that we have, because how we sin is actually very particular. It's actually not that generic, right? And particular calling and gifts that we have, right? So when we think about like Asian American discipleship, that's basically what we mean, right? Like, how do we make sure that, and I think a lot of pastors, the ministry people know this intuitively. They just know, oh, that's why we talk about, I don't know, talking about their father wound, their mother wound. That's a very particular thing, right? Yeah. The immigrant parent or whatever. I'm like, that's a very particular thing. Can you have better language for that? Can we do it in such a way so that you're actually sophisticated in how you talk about that, right? We talk about like obedience. Obedience is absolutely fraught for a lot of Asian Americans. Why? Because it's possible to do things and overlaps with, Asian modern minority myth with performance-driven kind of identity, right? So because it overlaps with that, you can make people serve like a modern minority God is basically what I say. Right? It's like a God of performance. And it's very, very subtle, but once that happens, the gospel kind of becomes lost altogether. So how do you make sure that you talk about commitment, sacrificial living without going in that direction? Because if you go in that direction, you've lost the whole thing. Or particular calling that we have, like, sometimes we're like, we don't look or act like leaders if it's a typical white leader that we have, white, tall male, so if you don't have that, how do we think about the gifts that we have? Because it's not valued by people, right? So I think in that sense, to be able to say, oh, this is actually a pain that you have. Now, not people might not talk about it, but this is a serious pain that's going to be very crucial for your discipleship journey. And our church has to spend time on this thing. For example, I'll give you one of the examples I tell people all the time, and a lot of people who've heard me will recognize it. I tell people, because I woke up to this thing. It wasn't like I cared about being, I really didn't care about being Asian American at all. Like, it's something that I kind of like really had a crisis where God brought me to this thing. But one of the moments is when I'm listening to Tim Keller's sermon. I love Tim Keller. Like, I think I owe lots to Tim Keller. But this is where I woke up and I realized, oh my gosh, he's an old white man. Like, he's good at what he does, but there's a limitation to what he does, right? He was talking about, he goes, oh, I remember specific, I used to get this is how old I am. I used to get this cassette subscription. Yeah. So every week I'll listen to it.
You were like OG Tim Keller.
Yeah. No, I listened to it for a decade. I know Tim Keller well. My wife went to Redeemer. She got baptized. It's just, Keller writes, I know that well, right? I mean, I'm very informed in this way. But this is where I woke up. This one sermon, he goes, God's not a boss. God's a father. He can't fire you. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Yeah. And then I thought for half a second and say,
that's so painful.
Holy cow, what is he talking about? That doesn't work at all. I was like, Tim, half your congregation is Asian American. Do you talk to them? Yeah. Right? Do you talk to these people? Because if you did, you would know the fact that analogy does not work.
Yes.
It does not work. And you said it as like a passing comment.
Yeah.
When you should have spent like a whole sermon series on God's fatherhood. Yeah. Think about that analogy. Like, what are you doing differently? Well, you're realizing, oh, these are fraught. Now, I'm not saying every Asian American has a bad father. I'm saying parents are weighty.
Yeah.
So you have to deal with that. That's what I'm trying to say. Because we want to try to avoid those kind of stereotypes. Every single person is like, that's not what we're trying to say. But these things are weighty. So how do you deal with that? Instead of talking about father and saying, oh, that means something, you have to realize, I might have to unpack this on like a 6-part series, right? But nobody does that. I don't know anybody who does that. And I'm like, if you really own your ministry context, you would do that, right? You'd be like, this is what fatherhood means, right? I mean, it would be beneficial even like a Midwest white church because people have all kinds of different fathers. Yeah. But this is how you contextualize it. It's not something weird. It's like, hey, this is a pain point. You have to really go deeper in this context, in this particular situation, because if you don't, it'll totally, it won't, the gospel meaning of God's fatherhood wouldn't impact us at all.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's so good. And I mean, I think that what you offer is a very strong and important challenge to not just Asian American pastors, but just pastors in general that are shepherding their flock, or ministry leaders, or ministry leaders that are like working with different communities overall. So like the need for contextualized ministry, the need for contextualized pastoral care is there. But but I think both you and I would probably argue and agree that a lot of Asian American ministry leaders aren't necessarily leaning into the nuance. They're doing surgery with a sledgehammer when it comes to their Asian American identity and Asian American discipleship.
Right.
What do they need to do in order to disciple their congregants well, to pastor their congregants well, to lead their congregants well?
I think a lot of pastors, they intuitively do it. They just know. They're like, they read this book. They're like, that's not going to work in our church. Mm-hmm. They know it's not going to work. They tweak it in their own way. What I want them to do is actually know exactly what they're doing, right? And to be like, you generally think we do it this way. I'm like, let me tell you what this way means. And even the things that you didn't think about, let's unpack them. So, so much of what we talk about is just having language, right? It's just like, how do we do that? How do we actually have precise tools? You're doing spiritual surgery on a regular basis, if you think about that analogy, and you really don't have a lot of tools. And the tools you have are just for different kind of surgery, right? So the question is, how do we do that kind of work? Like, I'll tell you, like, even, this is a weird analogy, but did you know that, like, people's earwax are different depending on what race? That's a really weird idea, right? Like, what? The people have, like, liquidy earwax.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is that possible? We're the same species, right? Now, I'm saying, like, there are situations in our church context where you need different kind of ministry tools, different medical tools in a sense, right? And we don't have that because we weren't really taught that.
Yeah.
I'm a seminary professor, and I know most seminary tools and so much of the resources we grew up, we were taught with were for middle class suburban white churches. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're different people. Like, it does help us. There's an overlap to our experience, but what do you do with all the other elements of it? That just doesn't really connect with where we are. Do we force ourselves, or do we just say something's wrong with us? We just need all these tools. And I think part of the problem is the fact that seminaries they don't have the level of research put into it that really kind of addresses this context. And we are seriously under-resourced as a community. Think about the amount of books that's being produced, all the academic books, all the popular books. How do we celebrate, like, hey, one Asian American book like every other year, or maybe and even then, that might not be that critically insightful,
yes,
right? Because they're using, once again, like, sledgehammer, and so that doesn't really help us that much. I think that's part of where we are right now. So, that's the struggle. It's a monumental struggle, but it's really doing not a generic one-size-fits-all kind of ministry, but a particular kind of ministry where God encounters different people where they are, right? It's not like a generic experience we're having with God. No, God actually talks to us where we are, with our bodies, with our experiences. And we're trying to help people encounter that God.
Yeah. So if someone was listening to this and they're like, this feels overwhelming, right? I don't know where to begin. Where do they begin?
Part of what we do, I think, is there are some programs that we do. Obviously, I'm trying to write a popular version, because my book, Doing Asian American Theology,
it's a little dense.
It's an academic book, right? There's a lot of heavy lifting I have to do, because I have to really do all the theological moves to say this is not just for Asian Americans. This is not hey, we have to be weird. That's what it is. I'm saying this is who God is. Yes. This is how He functioned, right? So I have to do that heavy lifting, but that's not necessarily for popular consumption. Just for people in your small group to read. So I'm trying to write that book. So we're doing that. I think we do have a lot of formation groups that we do at the center, trying to figure out how to get people through those things, to kind of understanding what the vocabulary is, understand themselves. I think a lot of it has to do with just kind of owning our own stories, in a sense. Really, but no matter what, there's just no shortcut. there's no shortcut to actually learning, right? And the reason why I wrote the book was like, well, what are we gonna do? Like, are we gonna read like 20 books? How are we gonna read that? Like, it's impossible, right? We don't have time. Like, there was a person who was like in her 50s, and she was at this kind of Asian American formation cohort that the Asian American Center runs. And she was like, after our like 6-week kind of cohort, she was tearful and said, I can't believe I'm 50 something and now I have the vocabulary to understand this, right? Yes. She's like, what if I had it in my 20s or in my teens even, right? Because now I know certain things that I was taking responsibility for. It's not my responsibility. It's some things that I was really hurt by. I can understand the fact that I can receive healing for those things. And there's no shortcut for that because it's like, how do you get all that knowledge right away, right? And so there are, they're like learning our names. Like they're in our varsity books. They're doing I think all those books are helpful. But generally, it's understanding the fact that there actually is your personal experience, and there are things you have to read and learn about. Yeah. Right? If you don't do that, there's no way to understand your experience properly.
Yeah. So I mean, you're basically saying that people have to mind their own experiences, reflect on what they've gone through, assign appropriate labels to different things, but then also not assume that their personal experience can be extrapolated to the broader community, and still have to have a type of consciousness around not just our own histories, but the ways in which the world moves around us, prescribes value to us, views us, treats us, even if we personally haven't experienced that.
Right. I mean, because once again, it might be your experience, but it might be understanding other people's experience, your family members, why they're like that, right? Maybe your parents. A lot of people who go to the formation group, they realize, oh my gosh, I understand my parents so much more.
Yeah.
Like they had so much migration trauma. And I realized they were just being crazy.
Yeah.
They were just toxic. And I realized, well, I always tell people like, would you have done better? I mean, now that I'm older, I realize, I don't know. I'd have a lot more empathy toward, my parents, my dad. I'm like, that was hard. Would I have done better? I don't know.
Yeah.
So you realize these are not simple things. And you also understand the fact that they were under tremendous amount of pressure and that they couldn't articulate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, when you understand broader experience, when you understand, for example, like the 170 years of Asian American history, you realize, we are not the first one to be loud. We're not the first one to protest, right? Like, we've had so many different decades of it. It's just that every time they protest, like, the American society forgets about it, they erase it. So it seems as though we're the first ones. Like, I always make fun of, like, I shouldn't make fun of them, but I was like, the people who are like, oh, I'm the first one to learn from Black people. I'm like, please sit down. Like that's what the whole Asian American studies is about. Like we began, the Asian American labor started like interacting with Black Power movement 50 years ago. Yeah. So you're not the first one. Like, it's like the false, like, it's like the first false the trailblazer. Like you're not the first trailblazer, right? So I think that idea, or even the fact that my Korean American experience, even though it's significant, it's not the Asian American experience. Like there are people who came before, there are people who came very differently. And how do you understand that? As you talk about Asian American experience, you realize, oh, this is how my family was, and this is how I think about it. But like even Confucianism it really impacts East Asians. It doesn't really impact Southeast Asians or South Asians. So how do we make sure that I handle that carefully, right? The fact that we get some of the modern minority, but some of the Southeast Asians, they don't get modern minority. It doesn't really happen that way.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure we talk about that? And to understand the fact that, hey, when you're talking about it, when you're interacting with people, you do it with more precision and nuance. Like I tell people, like, with the nuance, it can be a great insight. Without the nuance, it can be just racism. Like, it's like a crude racist joke, right? But the difference is the nuance.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you learn how to talk with nuance and care? To be like, oh, yeah, there is something there. Like there is something, you might be like, Chinese people are cheap. That's just racism, okay? Yeah. But there might be reasons why, because of financially, because of migration, because of family patterns, the fact that money becomes a significant item or whatever, right? That can be a really helpful cultural insight. How do you deal with things like that?
Yeah.
And to do that, I think it's to take ourselves more seriously and to say, oh, we are worthy of study. And I tell people like, think of like when like I said, spent 2 decades, over a decade learning Confucianism. I was like, hey, that's worthy of study. I am worthy of study and attention to spend energy and time into learning these things so that I can be more careful. That can be like, hey, not all Confucianism is bad, right? Like I know it now enough to know, oh, this part is absolutely toxic. This part actually redeemable. This part, pretty amazing. But to do that, you need to take yourself seriously.
That's so good. And what a great word to start kind of landing the plane here. I think there are so many people that are still trying to figure out what their value is in society as Asian Americans. And we're trying to navigate like who we are in light of what other people expect us to be. But what you're saying is we should look at who we are in light of, one, who God expects us to be or calls us to be or has led us to be. But two, to see ourselves as individual image bearers made in God's precious, significant image, and then understand that we are not the only one from our own communities that have particular experiences that are oftentimes shared, but again, are not universally and always shared. That does seem like a lot of work. So like I'm thinking about so on the one hand, I'm playing the contrarian here. On the one hand, I'm all in agreement with you. On the other hand, I'm thinking about the busy pastor who doesn't have the time to invest in this. Why should they? And give the reason why they should really do this. Because I'm hearing things like, well, it's pastoral malpractice if you are mispastoring your congregants, especially if they're Asian American, because you could either be so blanketed in with a blunt force, basically articulating racist things about them without looking at nuance. So I think that's compelling enough for me. But there might be some people listening in that are like, I don't know if I have the time for this. And Daniel just told me that I kind of do all this stuff intuitively. Why do they need to carve out time to do this?
Okay. Talking about pastoral work, we all minister out of God's grace. If you think about some of the sermons I preached, oh God, I just hope that God erases all that stuff from people's minds,
Not off of YouTube anymore.
Yeah, seriously, right? But I think there's an element where we just know we're not ministering out of our own sufficiency. We're ministering out of Christ. So what does that mean? So that's got to be the foundation for everything, right? And so much of the Asian American culture stuff, I've been working with churches and trying to figure out how to articulate what the gospel looks like. A lot of times, Asian American identity, at least in ministry, often ends up being kind of like cultural exegesis. You don't talk about it. It's like Greek exegesis. You don't always, unless you're showing off, talking about all the Greek, grammar and language. You can, but you have to figure out it has to serve a purpose. So, but sometimes it's really important to know some of those doctrinal elements of it. So I think the question is, it ends up being more implicit than explicit, right? I tell people when I work with them, I'm like, if the congregation isn't there, you don't talk about being Asian American, but you think about it. When you say father, it's loaded. You don't have to say, well, because we're all Asian American, we have issues with our mother. You don't have to say that. You just know. You handle that carefully, right? And I think this is where, it's going to be a journey no matter what. It's a long journey. But to know, this is important. This is something that we have to do. And it's so much of it is making the gospel concrete to ourselves, right? And not, once again, have a generic ministry and gospel, which ends up being kind of a white normative gospel, right? It helps us to some degree, but it doesn't serve us that well. It's like Costco pants.
Yeah.
I realize now it used to work, but my critique of Costco pants, but so many people like Costco, it doesn't really work that well. I was like, Costco pants, this sounds great.
I love Costco pants. And there's so many of them now.
But before it's be this, things that don't fit, one size fits all, and it just definitely doesn't fit. I think the idea is the fact that ministry is not one size fits all. The question is, what does it really mean to take your people seriously and to realize, oh, this is where they are.
Yeah.
And to understand their narratives and their stories matter. So without thinking that, that's basically why you don't copy sermons from different places. It just doesn't work. That's not how God speaks. God's a living God in our specific time and context.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Daniel, this has been a wonderful conversation, and there's so much more that we can mine. I want to encourage people to pick up the book that you wrote and whatever book you write, Doing Asian American Theology. But if they wanted to kind of engage more with you, how would they do that? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing right now is just sign up to our AACC.fuller.edu. I mean, that's basically what our website is. This has actually been our problem. We were talking about this morning at our staff meeting. We've spent so much time. I mean, I've spent 2 decades researching, right? Because what we didn't want is to promote stuff, to be like, hey, here's all flashy stuff, and there isn't real content. Why? Because Asian American stuff is complicating. If it was shallow, we wouldn't offer that much more than what you talk about after church. But what I'm saying is there actually is real content, real knowledge you can have that actually will help you and get you out of going on in circles, right? So we are trying to do that. And so when you sign up, you will offer different things that come up, we'll offer different events. And I think in that sense, you will kind of be part of our conversation in terms of how do you get you kind of thinking in that way. And also, because we're one of the first Asian American centers that actually draw really heavily from Asian American psychology and Asian American studies. I belong to both. I belong to Asian American Psychological Association and Association of Asian American Studies. When I began, I was like, oh, there aren't a lot of Asian American books. What I didn't realize is the fact that there was actually 50 years of Asian American psychology and 50 years of Asian American studies.
Yeah.
What we've done is connected to all that.
Yeah.
And because we've done that, I think it gives us a lot more depth to how we talk about Asian American ministry and identity than if we didn't connect with that. Then it would just be like, hey, let's sit around and talk about how we were traumatized at Asian American, like our immigrant youth groups or whatever. That's all that would be. And you would go around in circles forever. And I'm saying that's not really beneficial.
Yeah, that's good. So besides the website, is there anything social media?
Yeah, I mean, we're, I think through that, of course, the podcast, we're trying to, because we're dealing with so many different things. We have, obviously, the Asian American Center has grown significantly. We have the Asian American Christian History Institute.
Shout out Tim Sang.
Yeah, Tim Sang. We have Asian American Wellbeing Collaboratory with Jessica Chen Fang. She's amazing. Jessica Chen Fang. Yeah, we have the Asian American Pastoral Formation Initiative. We actually have the Asian American, the Filipino American Ministry Initiative. We're actually in the process of starting the Korean American Ministry Initiative, the South Asian American one, because we realize the fact that these things are complicated. The Asian American umbrella is beneficial to a degree, but there still has to be so much invested in the ethnic specific aspects of it.
That's right.
And we want to do that. We want to respect that. We don't want to ignore that and saying, well, we're all Asian American. That kind of sweeping over doesn't really serve our lives and our ministry that way.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks for taking the time to be with me. This is fun to chat. You are a deep well of great insight. And so thanks for doing what you do and for the investment and care you put into studying Asian American theology.
Thanks, Ray, for the invitation. Thanks for the conversation. And I mean, really, AACC is really trying to get the Asian American community to have that voice. So I appreciate all the things you do and trying to figure out how to mobilize our community. Hopefully we can all the different entities in the Asian American Christian world kind of find ways to work together better.
Well, I love that. Well, this has been another episode of the AACC Podcast. We're just so thankful for the time that you spent to be with us. If you find this helpful, make sure that you share it with others and let us know what you found most helpful, as it will help us decide future content that we create Further, if you're not connected with us on social media, make sure you are connecting with us at AA Christ Collab. Check out our website. We have a host of articles, resources, linking even to Fuller's Asian American Center and beyond. And so check out our website, and until next time, we'll look forward to connecting again.